Wait for it. The Sun. This is one of the easiest cards to read. Anytime you encounter it, you can rest assured that what you're about to encounter in life is a creepy baby. Hopefully by now you've understood that part of my process in understanding the cards in a reading is to think about what the card represents in real life, what the object is and what it's for. That's really kind of the underlying point of all of this. It's the main technique. The goal is to think about what, in this case, the sun is for, what it does, and then to see if that can unlock something in a reading. And I'm going to take you through my journey today, but that is really the point I want you to sort of think about. And I found some interesting things when I was making notes for this, things I hadn't really talked about before, and I'm going to share them with you in a second. But it's just an example, again, of how we can discover so much when we're open to potential rather than sort of limiting ourselves by restrictive meanings that may or may not help in a particular situation or context. It's a weird thing to say, what is the sun for? Because it sort of doesn't have a purpose. Like, we are here because the sun exists. If the sun did not exist, we wouldn't be here. And so to say, what is the sun for is kind of weird. It's not for anything. We're just lucky enough to have it because we wouldn't exist without it. But what that reminds us is that this is, in a way, the most important card in the tarot, because it's the only thing we can't really live without that's depicted in it. So in that way, the sun can represent anything life-giving or life-sustaining. That can represent things that are important to our survival. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of a big concept, one larger than I usually like to wrestle with in these videos, but remember, we're talking about a metaphor for something. And so even though there are very few things in life we actually can't live without, there are a lot of things that we say we can't live without. And this card can represent those things we feel like we can't live without, you know. And if you were to pair it with things like court cards, then it could represent, for example, people that we can't live without. If it were paired with the lovers, for example, it might represent the lover, the person you can't live without, the one, at least for the moment. If the question is about an object or event, then the sun might indicate how important it is, that it is the most important thing. And if you're asking for advice in a situation, it may remind you that you need to keep your attention on the most important things and sort of declutter and take everything else out of the equation so that you don't get distracted. I said in the moon video how the dimness of the moon can diminish the intensity of other cards. But the sun, on the other hand, it intensifies everything. And so if you have a really good reading, then it's going to be really good. And if you have a really bad reading, then it suggests it could be really bad. So the sun is sort of an amplifier of whatever is around it. It intensifies, it underlines, it italicizes. And again, it points to something being really important or large. Or hot. We'll talk about that too a little bit later. The sun is a spotlight, and so it's going to shine its light on and reveal things. Where the moon would distort them, the sun shows us things as they really are. And there's no way to escape it. A bunch of years ago, I went to New Orleans for work, and on one of our days, they took us on a tour of St. Louis cemeteries, 1 and 2. And I think this was back when you could tour them. I don't know if you still can. Anyway. The thing that what happened was it was the middle of the day, it was the middle of September, it was blazing hot, and there's no shade, there's no trees in those cemeteries. So you just have the sun directly on you, and also the stones, the tombstones are mostly white, and so you have sort of paved ground, all these white sort of oven tombs, and these intensity of light just sort of being reflected from every direction, and it was so intense. It just made it hotter and it's so much brighter, and it was really kind of overwhelming for a little while. I mean, beautiful and interesting, but like, whoa, you know, there's no escape from the heat and the sun in that moment. And like that to me is a metaphor for what this card can indicate in some readings, that sort of inescapable, unrelenting light that you just cannot hide from. There is no shade. There's no amount of sunglasses or UV protection that's going to keep you feeling comfortable. You know, the sun can really be that oppressive. And again, the sun can be good things too, but like, again, we're just sort of thinking about the intensity of this particular card in this instance. And that's interesting because it reminds us that there's very little nuance to this card. There's very little subtlety to this card. So it kind of represents intensity and lack of nuance, which is certainly not something we see in broadcast journalism today at all. So take that. When I said the sun's a spotlight, it can also represent the limelight, sort of like the star, but maybe less intense. The star might be celebrity generally or notoriety generally, but the sun is intense. You know what I mean? So the sun sort of takes fame and makes it into the fame monster. So you think about celebrities, for example, who cannot escape paparazzi, who cannot have every, who cannot help but having every moment of their life documented by someone for money, you know what I mean, money that they don't get. So it's like that unrelenting quality, whereas the star is a little lovelier, a little sort of nicer, what we imagine celebrity and fame is when those of us who fantasize about it. The sun is sort of the ugly side of that in a way. I didn't realize I had so many sort of ugly things to say about the sun, but you get the point too. It's just sort of this level of intensity, so I'm just contextualizing in different ways. And you can think of it a little easier or more neutrally than that, certainly. I mean, the sun is the center of our solar system, and so it could really represent just being the center of attention. You know, so if you say, I'm going to a party tonight, you know, am I going to have fun? If you're outgoing and an extrovert and you like people's attention on you, then the sun could suggest you're going to have a great time. You're going to be the star of the party. Everyone's going to love you. You're going to be like the Truman Capote of your time. You know, the sun is just going to sort of suggest that you're going to be the center of attention and influence in that situation. Same thing at work. You know what I mean? How is this new job going to go? You're going to really be the center of attention for a lot of ways. So, you know, keep that in mind too. It's sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not. So you just have to think about, again, contextually, whether or not you want that experience. The sun is hot, as I said earlier, and that can suggest really interesting things when paired with sexy cards, like the devil. It can suggest a real powerful, like, irresistible attraction, something that is that hot that, you know, other people can feel it. You know, those sort of intense pulls towards another person. With the lovers and the devil and even the tower, you know, that sort of intensity, that heat between two things, two people. You know, the sun is all about that heat. It's all about that fire. And, you know, things might get a little sweaty. Who knows? Justice in the sun or judgment in the sun might not bode well if you're trying to hide something or get away with something. But on the other hand, if you are being treated unjustly, if you are being sort of swept up into a system that isn't or doesn't have your best interests at heart, the sun could suggest a clearing away of that injustice. You know, again, sort of sunlight is the best disinfectant, that cliche. The sun could say, justice will be done in a better way than, say, if justice were paired with the Hierophant, where the system benefits. With the sun, you know, the corruption comes out. But if you're the corrupt one, then look out. The sun with a lot of wands cards is going to suggest that things are getting really hot or are really hot, and that's fun sometimes, but it's also worth knowing that that can lead to burnout. And if there's no other suits to ground that energy, it's a little bit dangerous because, first of all, fire needs something to feed off of, and so it needs fuel, it needs earth, and it needs water and air to moderate it, you know. Air feeds the fire, fuel keeps it going, and water sort of protects it from taking over. So if you have an intensely hot reading with a lot of hot cards, like wands, then the sun really you want to sort of look at moderation in some way, because it may just be too much. It may just be a flash in the pan or a flare up, but not one that doesn't leave you scorched. You know what I mean? There's going to be some burn marks afterwards, again, sort of metaphorically. So keep that in mind too. You know, when there's a really fiery reading and there's nothing to neutralize that fire, something in life may need some moderation somewhere, some sort of influence that isn't so hot, that doesn't burn out as easily. In that vein, you know, while I said the sun is intense, other cards, cooler cards, can diminish that intensity a little bit. It can sort of bring it, moderate it, you know, down to earth a little bit. So cards like the High Priestess, the Empress, Swords and Cups cards certainly can soften the intensity of the sun, because they are more moderate influences. They're cooler energies. And they, especially with swords, kind of have a clarity of mind to make you go, okay, I can't burn out. I can't sort of put all my energy into this one thing, or sort of put so much into it now that I have nothing to give later. So the sun can be sort of, I don't want to say diminished, but tempered is a good way to say it, given temperance, another card that would be influential here, can make it more temperate, more reasonable, less intense, and a little easier to work with, certainly. Children have often been associated with this card. A lot of versions of it throughout history have showed children on it, however creepily they may have done that. And so the card can suggest childhood or children, partnered with parental cards like the kings and queens, the emperor, the empress. It could suggest a parental relationship, caretaking of some kind. You know, that walled garden in a lot of versions of the card is a really interesting detail, because it does sort of pen the energy in a little bit, and certainly creates a sense of safety, but also limitation, which I think is a really interesting detail on a lot lot of cards, and that could be useful in a reading too. With the wheel, it's interesting, you could sort of see the turn of the year, the turn of the season, certainly, but you also may see the impacts of climate change in that card paired with the wheel. The intensity, again, of the sun, and the fact that the sun is unprotected, unmoderated, which is one of the things that makes climate change so dangerous, is that heat from the sun gets trapped on Earth. That's one of the things that causes climate change. So the wheel and the sun could be, an interesting interpretation. With the sun and the moon, you might see certainly polarities, but also just science. If you think about the sun and the moon as like scientific studies generally, then it could suggest science of any kind. And again, there's all those common associations with the sun of joy and excitement and fun, and I think those are there, especially after like the bleak winter. Just the awakening of the sun, the return of the sun, the way that it fills our bodies, with vitamin D, and we start to feel better, and it certainly dispels a lot of seasonal affective disorder. You know what I mean? So it can suggest a brightening, a lightening, a sort of warmth, just like good qualities of like spring and summer coming back to life. And I think that, again, there's a metaphor in that that's super helpful. I mean, I don't know about you all, but like this was a really hard winter for me. It wasn't especially cold, it wasn't especially snowy, but just it was dark and sort of emotionally draining. And I think that the sun frees us from that. You know what I mean? The sun sort of sets us free and says, all right, it's time to sort of get outside, get some fresh air, you know what I mean? Enjoy it before, again, the intensity of summer sort of takes over and I become a miserable bitch again. So, I mean, there's the sun in a lot of ways. And again, the point is not so much that you memorize all these things or that you agree with what I'm saying, but that you're able to sort of think in terms of what the sun is and does and how it behaves in the world, and then how that can impact interpretations in a reading. So 2 more cards to go. Judgment and the World. It's going to be interesting. I can't believe we've come so far. It's like, what? Who? How? Oh my God. As always, I hope this was interesting. Where do you see the sun? How do you interpret the sun in real life? Take care. Be good. We'll talk soon, and I'll see you next week.